There are moments in history that can make your heart stop. The St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre is one such event, a story intertwined with fear, power, hatred, and betrayal, a story that sends chills down your spine even centuries later. Have you ever wondered how a single order could turn a festive night into a bloody nightmare? Imagine Paris in the 16th century. The streets are bustling with people. The royal court is preparing for a grand wedding. The atmosphere is tense, but it seems like something might finally change for the better. The young Catholic princess, Marguerite de Valois, is about to marry the Protestant leader, Henry of Navarre. This union was supposed to symbolize reconciliation, yet no one suspected that behind the formal smiles and elegant attire, something dark was brewing. And then came the night of August 23rd, 1572. The air was still filled with the festive spirit, but an odd sense of unease began to creep in. None of the Protestants who had traveled to Paris for the wedding could have guessed that this night would be their last. Do you hear it? The sound of footsteps on narrow streets, whispered conversations around the corner. Then the first scream, killers bursting into homes. The massacre began, its scale still hard to comprehend even now. They say the blood flowed through the streets like water during a heavy rainstorm. People were killed in their beds, on their doorsteps, in the streets, all of it under the cover of night, amidst complete chaos. But how could this have happened? Could such cruelty emerge suddenly? Of course not. The massacre was the culmination of years of hatred and conflict between Catholics and Protestants in France. The Huguenots, as the French Protestants were called, had been growing stronger, their influence expanding, and this caused panic among the Catholics, especially Queen Mother Catherine de' Medici, known for her skill in intrigue. Catherine is said to have been a key figure in this tragic event. It was she who convinced her son, young King Charles IX, that the Huguenots posed a threat to the throne and needed to be eliminated. Once the young king gave his consent, the events unfolded with terrifying speed. By morning, around 3,000 people were dead in Paris. 3,000. Imagine, 3,000 people who had laughed, talked, and shared wine just the day before. And then, the massacre spread to other cities in France, and the total death toll reached tens of thousands. Surprisingly, even amid this tragedy, some retained their humanity. A few Catholics hid their Protestant neighbors, risking their own lives. But such examples were rare. The mass hysteria consumed almost everyone. What's astonishing is that at first, the massacre was justified. It was claimed that the Huguenots had provoked it with their conspiracies, but this was just a facade, an attempt to hide the truth. What drove people that night? Fear, hatred, or perhaps a thirst for power? History is full of mysteries, but one of the darkest truths is that this massacre was carefully planned. Imagine this. Days before the wedding, hundreds of Huguenot leaders gathered in Paris. It was almost a signal. All the key figures were in one place, without protection, without armies. How could such an opportunity be missed? Now picture yourself as one of these leaders. You're walking the streets, celebrating, shaking hands, feeling safe. After all, you're here at the king's invitation. Then, in an instant, you hear church bells ringing in the distance. That was the signal to begin. They say the first victim of that night was Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a prominent Huguenot leader. He was killed in his own home. And the most horrifying part, his death was made an example. His body was thrown out of the window to show everyone what had happened to him. It was an act of intimidation. But if you think fear stopped anyone, you'd be wrong. Fear only fueled the fury. That night saw horrors beyond words. People were dragged from their homes, killed in front of their families. Some sought refuge in churches, but even there, death found them. The entire city of Paris turned into an arena of chaos and terror. Even King Charles, who is attributed with the infamous phrase, "Kill them all, so that not one is left," later couldn't bear the weight of his conscience. Historians say he suffered from nightmares and fits of hysteria in the aftermath. But think about it differently. Have you ever wondered what it was like for ordinary people? For those simply living their lives in the city? For some, it was a tragedy. For others, an opportunity. Sadly, the St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre became a kind of golden hour for looters. Under the guise of religious war, people looted homes, stole valuables, and settled personal scores under the pretense of fighting for faith. And here's something even stranger. The massacre was justified. Catholic officials claimed it was an act of self-defense, that the Huguenots had been plotting to overthrow the king. But the truth, we may never know. All the stories seemed tangled in a web of rumors, propaganda, and fear. Interestingly, the world was divided even back then. The Pope sent a congratulatory message to the king, viewing it as a victory for Catholicism. Meanwhile, in Protestant countries, this night was remembered with horror and indignation. The St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre became a symbol of how far people could go when faith is turned into a weapon of murder. But what happened next? This is perhaps the most intriguing part. That bloody episode not only failed to put an end to the conflict, but on the contrary, made it even more ferocious. The wounds of that night didn't heal for centuries. Have you ever wondered how these events shaped France and perhaps the entire world? Hold on tight. There are still more mysteries, unexpected twists, and chilling lessons from history to come. After that dreadful night, France was never the same. The St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre left scars not only on the body of the nation but also on its soul. But here's the mystery. Why does this episode continue to haunt us even centuries later? Perhaps because it wasn't just an act of violence. It was a meticulously planned spectacle, where every step seemed calculated down to the finest detail. Picture this. The morning of August 24th. Paris wakes up to silence. But this isn't ordinary silence. It's a menacing, oppressive emptiness, broken only by the sound of soldiers' footsteps and the cries of those still trying to escape. The streets that had been so full of life the day before were now littered with bodies. Blood flowed into the gutters, and the people were too terrified to even look out their windows. And here's where it gets fascinating. Many have wondered, was King Charles IX truly the mastermind behind this massacre, or was he just a puppet in the hands of his mother, Catherine de' Medici? Catherine is a mysterious figure, almost mythical. She has often been portrayed as a master manipulator, willing to do anything to maintain power. But is this true? Or was she simply a victim of her time when every misstep could cost the throne? Historians are still debating. Some argue that Catherine wanted to eliminate the threat posed by the Huguenots, who were growing too powerful. Others believe she was trying to maintain a delicate balance between Catholics and Protestants, but the situation spiraled out of control. So what was the truth? There's another strange detail. It's said that Charles IX initially hesitated to authorize the massacre. Legend has it, he spent a sleepless night, torn by doubt, and only at dawn did he give his infamous order. Kill them all, so that none remain, the king is often quoted as saying. But did he really utter those words? Or is this just an attempt to shift the blame onto a young and fragile monarch? And the most chilling part? Many Protestants trusted the protection of the crown until the very last moment. They believed their presence in Paris for the wedding was their opportunity to prove their loyalty and preserve peace. But it turned out they had been gathered in one place not for reconciliation, but for annihilation. Yet, despite the chaos and bloodshed, the Huguenots survived. Their movement was not destroyed. In fact, within a few decades, the Protestants would rise to power again. Henry of Navarre, who miraculously escaped that night, would later become King of France. He would go down in history as Henry IV, the man who famously said, "Paris is worth a mass." He converted to Catholicism to claim the throne, but never abandoned the idea of reconciliation between religions. Have you ever wondered what it must have been like for Henry after that night? He lost friends, allies, and loved ones. He watched as everything he had worked for fell apart. Yet he managed to rise above it and become a leader who ended the wars of religion. Isn't that an extraordinary example of how even the darkest moments in history can give rise to something greater? But here's the question. Could that night have been avoided, or was it inevitable, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon until it finally bursts into a downpour? The story of the St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre is a tale of choices, intrigue, and consequences that still resonate today. And perhaps the scariest part of this story is its modern relevance. Hatred, fanaticism, and the thirst for power haven't disappeared. They've just changed their form. Would you like to know how the events of that night shaped the future of Europe? Let's dig even deeper, because the most fascinating insights are still ahead. The St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre wasn't just a historical episode, it became a symbol of how easily humanity can abandon its principles for power, fear, or false ideals. This bloody event taught us many lessons, but its greatest message is a warning about the dangers of hatred and fanaticism. After that terrible night, France did eventually find peace. But how many lives were destroyed along the way? How many futures were snuffed out before they even began? We often say, history is a teacher, but do we truly learn from it, or will events like the St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre repeat themselves again and again until we finally understand? Every generation faces a choice. What lessons to draw from the past? We live in an age where hatred still flares up for countless reasons. But we have something that people in the 16th century could only dream of. We have knowledge, we have history, and now it's up to us. Friends, if this story made you reflect, if you felt the weight of how deeply the past can resonate with the present, please share your thoughts. Write in the comments what lessons you see in this event and what you think we can do to prevent something similar in the future. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other fascinating and important stories from the past that help us better understand the present. History isn't just whispering to us, it's shouting. Let's listen together. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the darkest nights in history. Until next time, and remember, only through awareness can we build a better world.